Hello everyone. Today we're going to be working on solving some equations, and we're going to use those radical skills that we've been working on in our process of solving these equations. Okay, so we have a few examples and a summary slide at the end. Please take good notes as we go along. This should look familiar to you. You spent quite a bit of time doing this last year. Here's our first example. 5x squared minus 4 equals 96. If you're going to solve for x, your job is to try to get x isolated or by himself. So the first thing I would do is add 4 to both sides here. You get 5x squared equals 100. And then you would want to divide by the 5. You'd have x squared equals 20. So we're asking ourselves, what number squared makes 20? This probably isn't a number you can think of right off the top of your head because we're not familiar with all those weird irrational numbers that multiply to make 20 here. So what we need to do now to figure out this is we need to square root both sides because a squared and a square root cancel each other out. They're inverse operations. And so you'd have x equals, now anytime you take a square root here in the solving process, we need to be sure to include a plus or minus. That's because two positive numbers multiplied by each other, or a positive number squared, makes 20, and two negative numbers, a negative number times itself, could make 20, a positive 20. So positive and negative values need to be both included. So now we take a look at that square root of 20. We are not going to write the decimal value. We, in fact, are going to simplify the square root of 20 by saying what multiplies to make 20, and I need to make sure one of them is from my perfect square list. 4 is from my perfect square list. 4 times 5 makes 20. And so my simplified answer is 2 square roots of 5. So x equals both positive 2 square roots of 5 and negative 2 square roots of 5. In terms of solving for x here, okay? So let's look at second example. Negative 2x squared minus 6 equals negative 90. Same idea. Let's get x alone. We're going to add 6 here. Negative 2x squared equals negative 84. Then you divide by the negative 2. You'd have x squared equals negative 84 divided by negative 2. Those two negatives going to have a positive answer here. 42. And then we're going to go ahead and square root to isolate the x completely. So x is going to equal plus or minus whatever the square root of 42 is when we simplify. Now, you might want to think, what number, one of them has to be a perfect square, divides out of 42. You go through your list, and guess what? You might not find any. And when that happens, we just leave him as the square root of 42. So my answer is x equals positive square root of 42 or negative square root of 42. So plus or minus square root of 42. Here's a third example. Here we go. Minus 33 minus 33. 5x squared equals negative 30. Divide by the 5. Divide by the 5. X squared equals negative 6. Square root, uh-oh. What number squared makes negative 6? Nothing. You can't square a number and get a negative answer. So because there's a negative sign underneath the square root right here, if you tried to even type that in your calculator to get a decimal value, it would tell you error, error. That's because it's not a real answer, okay? It's what we call imaginary, and that's what you'll do next year. But for right now, we just need to be able to say what the solutions are here. So right now I would say x equals, I'd have to say no real solution here, okay? At this point, I cannot take a square root of a negative, so there is no solution to this problem. Last but not least, last example here, 3x squared divided by 14 plus a 6 has to make 12. Well, let's go about getting this x alone. Don't let the fact that there's a fraction in here make you nervous. Let's go through our same steps. Let's first subtract the 6. So I have 3x squared divided by 14 equals 12 minus 6 is 6. Then the next step I might want to do here, 3x squared is being divided by, that's division, 14. So if I was going to undo that so that that 14 was no longer over there, I would multiply by 14. Multiplying by 14 and dividing by 14 cancel each other out. but I have to remember to multiply by 14 on the other side as well. So I'd have 3x squared equals 6 times 14. Let's see, 6 times 14 is 84. And then I go ahead and I divide by the 3. X squared equals 28. And then square root, square root. So x equals plus or minus. Now we got to deal with that square root of 28. Square root of 28 broken apart. 4 times 7. So 2 square roots of 7. X equals positive 2 square roots of 7 or negative 2 square roots of 7. Those are my two solutions for this problem. So the basic idea is this. You need to basically solve for x using everything that you already know how to do. Isolate him, get him alone, use those inverse operations, okay? At the end, when you have an x squared, you're going to have to take a square root because that's how you undo squaring. That's the inverse operation. Simplify those radicals. You are not allowed to write any decimals at any time. That means even if your answer is a fraction, you got to keep them as a fraction, no decimals. And no negative numbers should be occurring in those square roots. If they do, that's a no solution type problem. And then always remember your plus or minus. A lot of times those are the things that people forget. That's a big important part of it to make sure that we're getting our two solutions, okay? So this is the thing to remember slide. Make sure that you get that in your notes, just little helpful hints from Kincaid here, okay? Thank you for taking good notes, and we'll get some practice in on this soon.